Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who's listening to this on the Temple Beth Am podcast. I'm back from a hiatus and looking forward to studying with you all. I really have missed our conversations and missed our deep inquiry, into Rashi's commentary. We have a couple of relatively straightforward verses coming up with some pretty short Rashis, which doesn't mean that we won't find ways to extend the conversation, but they could move more quickly than usual. And then we're going to hit a stretch of verses where Rashi does not comment. And as has been our ritual, for each verse, I will bring at least one other commentator so that every verse gets some treatment from the sources. It's been a while since I did this entirely on Zoom, so if I'm a little bit just clunky with the manipulating back and forth my screens, then you'll forgive me, because I'm also looking at the Rashi on a different screen, well, same screen, but a different window than my actual Zoom. Where we left off was chapter 10 of the book of Shemot, verse 15. We read it, but we had not read the Rashi, so it's kind of a cliffhanger. Verse 14. Verse 14. We read chapter 10, verse 14, and we never read the Rashi. We were going to get into it because we had a few minutes left, but the Rashi is not complicated, but it takes us to the book of Yoel, the book of Joel, and it was going to take a time just to understand the context of that chapter of Joel that Rashi is referencing, so we decided to wait until today. So let's go right into it. Chapter 10, verse 14. Just toggling back and forth to make sure I'm not missing anyone who's trying to get into the Zoom. No, it seems that everyone who wants to be here is here. Okay. I'm not going to share my screen just when we're looking at the text and the Rashi, because all of you have that in front of you, I think. But I'll share it, obviously, if I'm bringing in other sources. So, chapter 10, verse 14, Tova, do you want to read? You have to unmute yourself, Tova.
That would help. Okay. Vaya'al ha'arbe al kol eretz Mitzrayim, vayanach bechol gevul Mitzrayim, kaved meod. Lefanav lo haya chen, arbe kamohu, ve'acharav lo yiyeh ken. And the locusts, actually, does it say the locusts? Vayal arbe, the swarm of locusts?
Good. Singular noun, singular verb, referencing obviously not one giant locust. Even Rashi doesn't bring that kind of a midrashic expansion. I think the locust swarm is a good way of translating it. Everett Fox translates it as the locust horde, hyphenated. Okay.
Okay. I'm unmuted, right? Yeah. Okay. So yes, the swarm went up over all of Egypt and rested within the boundaries of Egypt very heavily.
Good.
Presumably. Before this, there had never been such a swarm, and after the same, there never was such a swarm again. Good.
The word lefanav is interesting. It's clear once you read the end of the verse that it's parallel to acharav, right? Before it had not been locusts like this, and after it neither. And the trup helps you. The trup actually suggests that the word lefanav is a fulcrum, right? A second fulcrum after the main fulcrum of Mitzrayim, because the Gedolah trup on the word lefanav stands on its own, dividing what came before it and what came after it. If you read the verse through the first time and you don't know what's coming, you could be tempted to connect the lefanav backwards, which I think you didn't do that, Tova. I'm saying one could be tempted to do that, to read it as Vayanach b'chol gvul Mitzrayim kaved ma'ov lefanav, that the locust swarm rested upon all of the boundaries of Egypt very heavily in front of him, Pharaoh, the Egyptian people. That's probably not what it means, because lefanav has the parallel of acharav later. But the first time one reads through that verse, one could be tempted to read it that way. Larry, your hand is up. Or Diane, I don't know if you're both there.
It's me. I have kind of, I don't know what to call it, maybe a meta question. Every once in a while, the Torah includes something that suggests that that this is written by a narrator who has some perspective on history.
Great. I was wondering if you were going to pick up on that.
I don't know how many times this actually happens. I mean, I think it happens with Yaakov in his struggle with the angel, and my memory is not good enough, but it's enough times that it's jolting, at least to me, that instead of just narrating what is happening at that moment, the Torah takes a step back, and at least for me, one can't help, but see the human hand in the drafting of the narrative. And I'm just wondering, has anyone written about this and looked at how many times this happens?
Absolutely. Both the 19th century German critical biblical scholars who began the more historically honest approach to taking apart the text have used verses like this, even more severe, more obvious, to show the sweep of history and the sense of time perspective in the text. Ibn Ezra has, towards the very end of his commentary on the Torah, has a very cryptic comment where he lists a couple of places where I think, and some scholars think, he's like winking us to suggest that he knows that we know that he knows that we know that it's very hard to resolve these verses with the notion of a text emerging, erupting in real time as the story is unfolding by the Holy One at Sinai, right? The phrase "V'haktani az ba'aretz," that the Canaanites were then in the land, which is one of the verses in Breshit, suggests to Ibn Ezra and others that, well, that means that if the Torah is looking backwards, it's suggesting that the perspective of the author is later than the time that the things are taking place. This one is more subtle because you could read it as a pure prescient prediction, right? That it hadn't happened until then, which is fine because that suggests a real-time transmission, nor would it ever happen again, not from the perspective of someone who is living later and knows that it happen again, but it's a way of creating like intentional hyperbole. It's so big. How big is it? It would never happen again. So in our verse, it's a little more subtle. There's some verses, right? Obviously, the death of Moshe has to be described by Midrash to, because how could the author of the text compose his own death? And yes, many people have written about it, including some traditional medieval commentators who we can tell, or at least we think we can tell, hundreds of years before the questions were permitted to be asked, were like pre-asking the question, and they were meditating on it a bit. So good pickup on that one. Yeah,
what
Tova.
About Ur Kasti, that's also to describe Ur of as Kasdi when you're referring to Abraham.
Right.
The Neo-Babylonians were significantly later than the time when Abraham was leaving Ur.
God, I never thought about that. I didn't realize that the word Kasdim was itself denoting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. Good. Anything else on the verse itself, which we had read last time before we go to the Rashi? Okay. Tova, you're still up.
No, not a good Rashi reader, though. So
not a good Rashi reader. Joel, do you want to read the Rashi?
Because it refers to Joel.
You see a method to my madness. And when Rashi quotes from the prophet Alan, then you can be the reader.
V'acharav lo yeh chen, and afterward there wasn't anything like it. Ve'oto shehaya b'yamei Yoel, and it was the same in the days of Yoel. Shin Nun.
Shene'emar.
As it is written, Kamo lo niyeh min haolam. As it is written, and like it, it was not ever. Will not be ever.
Okay, read the next 5 words, and then we'll pause.
Limdena, we learn from this. Shahaya kaved mishal Moshe, that it was heavy. What is mishal?
Heavier than Michel Moshe.
Michel. I'm sorry, Michel Moshe. That it was even heavy. Oh,
So as a way of helping you through kind of the tone, Rashi doesn't always list his question. He jumps to the answer. Here, he's actually just articulating a question. So if we could put a question mark, exclamation mark after Michel Moshe, what do we think his question is? In order to really understand it, we need to take a bit of a dive into the book of Joel. So
in order not to make this contradictory with Yoel, how do we interpret it? They can't both be the worst.
Correct. That's exactly right. So let's actually look at that verse in context. I'm going to share the screen. 1 second. Okay. So Yoel is one of the lesser known and lesser studied prophets. Ended up being a namesake for some of my favorite people in the world. Joel, I just gave you a nice compliment. Give me a smile. There's at least one. There's got to be more than one. There's definitely one haftarah that quotes from Joel. The haftarah for Shabbat Shuvah, depending on which parsha it is related to, has some sections from the book of Yoel. And like many of the prophets, he is prophesying, anticipating a moment when God's judgment or wrath will come upon the people for their sins. And that wrath is usually expressed either by swarms of nations or, in our case, swarms of beasts, right? There are times throughout the Nevi'im where the prophets predict that what will come upon Israel for their sinfulness will be evocative of what God brought upon the Egyptians, right? That God can be an equal opportunity plague bringer. So, second chapter of Joel. Tiku shofar. Second, someone is just entering the Zoom. Tiku shofar b'tzion, right? Appropriate for the season we're going to be coming into all too soon. Blast the shofar in Zion. The hariu bahar kodshi. It's translated here as sound and alarm. You see in the word hariu, the word from which we get the word truah, right? Which is one of the blasts of the shofar. So blast again in my holy mountain. Yirgezu kol yoshvei haaretz. Everyone who lives in the land will tremble, will shake. Kiva yom Adonai, God's day is coming. And when a prophet refers to God's day, it's not a good day, right? It's a day where God's judgment will be brought upon the people. Ki karov, and verily soon. Okay, that's the first verse. Second verse is the one that Rashi is referring to. What kind of day is this going to be? Yom choshech va'afela, a day of darkness and gloom. Yom anan v'arafel, a day of cloud, and it's translated here as densest cloud. Arafel is often translated as fog, right? So you can imagine the scene they're predicting, and evocative of, so far it seems evocative of not the plague that we're on in the Torah, but the next plague, darkness. Kishachar parus al haharim, like a blackness spread out over the mountain. Am rav ve'atzum. This is where Joel is being, I think, intentionally offering a double entendre, because Am normally refers to a people who's great and atzum. What is that language evocative of? Someone unmute and share with us. Tov, I can see that you're thinking, so unmute so we can hear you. Are you trying to unmute? Okay. So Rav Atzum is evocative of the language that Pharaoh used to describe us, right? So there's a wonderful circularity. Pharaoh was nervous that we were Rav Atzum, therefore mistreated us, therefore got plagues, including plagues of darkness and locusts. And now Joel is saying that because of the people's sins, an Am Rav Yatzun, a great nation. But here it doesn't really mean nation, it means a swarm. It's translated here as swarm because everyone seems to agree that what Joel is talking about is not a onslaught of Egypt or of Assyria or of Babylonia, but of locusts or beasts. Kamohu lo niyah mi'olam, like it had never been ever in the world. V'acharav lo yosef, and afterwards there would never be. Ad shnei dor vador, throughout the years and years. Okay, so if it's indeed talking about a swarm, and verse 3 makes it a little more clear, although it's a double entendre, because sometimes the prophets understood both our enemies' presence and natural afflictions to be a response to our sinfulness. If it is indeed a swarm of locusts black in the sky, then what is the problem in the verse that Rashi is alert to? Joel or others? Going back to what Rashi said. What's the problem if indeed Joel is talking about a swarm of insects that darken the sky? Joel?
Well, that it seems to contradict our verse where it says it never will happen again, and apparently did happen again.
Correct. If we take the Torah at face value, right, which is an interesting if we don't permit the Torah metaphor, just as we don't permit the Torah redundancy, we don't permit the Torah extraneousness, we don't permit the Torah lacuna, we look at each of those as saying something specific. That's the way Rashi reads the text. We read it as a love letter. Then when the Torah said that after this there would never be something like it, it wasn't just an exaggeration. This one goes to 11. We understood it to be specifically that there would never be a locust swarm like this. Then what do we do with the book of Joel that suggests that a swarm of sky darkening insects would be coming? And Rashi has an answer, and it's a very pikayun answer, but it's at least an answer. Okay, so now we understand this question. The oto shahayavi meyuel, and that one that took place in the days of Joel, as it said, kamohu lo niyah mi'olam, that there was never one like it. Lamadnu, you would think, I have to interpolate that we would learn from it, shahaya kaved mishal Moshe, that it was heavier than the one of Moses. I can actually stop sharing because you all have this. Keep reading, Joel. Al-Yadei. That ayin yud means Al-Yadei.
Al-Yadei minin harbe, by way of many species.
Good.
Shehayu yachad arbe. That word together is in one swarm. Yalak, chasil, gazam.
So Rashi says that the swarm that Joel is talking about was a multicultural swarm of insects. There was arbe, locusts, and also yelek and chasil and gazam, which are other sort of, potentially crop-devouring insects. You actually see them in several places. You see those words when it comes to list the some of the creepy crawlies that we can and cannot eat, and also they appear in the tochacha, in part of the reproof in Parshat Bechukotai and Parshat Kitavo, that God is saying, these things will come and devour your land if you do not follow the commandments, which makes the book of Joel here, at least according to Rashi, both evocative of Exodus and also evocative of the two times that God is warning us what's going to happen if we don't act properly once we get to the land of Israel. So the resolution is that what happened in the times of Joel was larger volume, but that's because there were many species. Aval
Moshe lo haya ela min echad. Except for with Moshe, it was only but of one kind. V'kamohu lo haya v'lo yeh. And in that sort of swarm, it was only never been and never was.
Right.
Never will be.
Right. So Rashi's found a way to preserve the singularity, the the superlatives of our verse without it undermining Joel, because they were differently unique, right? Joel had more total species, more total insects, right? Bigger swarm represented more than one species. But there's never has been, and nor there will ever be, a swarm of locusts as big as the one that came upon Egypt. Okay, just that species. Let me pause there to see if anyone has any comments or questions on that. Oh, hi, Rick. Welcome to Whiteman. I hope that you're enjoying the room with lots of elbow room without any of us. Okay, anything else on that verse?
Just
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I don't see why Rashi or we are being so picky about this. I mean, Joel, the prophet, may have thought, well, what a great metaphor or a great figure of speech. Let's use it again. I mean, doesn't have to be factual. It could be just literary.
Yes, of course. And then we wouldn't have a class.
Oh.
Right. And I say that tongue in cheek, like, of course you're right. Right. And the spirit of Arthur is alive. Of course, the way
I was thinking of Arthur. Yeah. Right.
Of course, the way Rashi is reading it is not the way it has to be read. And of course, we could have an entire shiur, and it would be wonderful to just read our text for its literary overtones and evoke and things that are evoked, and that's just a different methodology for studying the tradition. But certainly, yeah. I remember I once asked a similar question of my teacher, Rabbi Frankus, on a Talmud, in a Talmud class. Rabbi Frankus was an old school, still alive. No, actually, no, I think he died a year ago. Originally from Poland, was both my father-in-law's teacher, JTS, and mine 30 years later. I've told some Rabbi Frankus stories. He was wonderful. He was from a generation that never will be, speaking things that never will be. And I'll explain that in a second, Larry. And he had a particular way of holding his classroom, very yeshivish. And I don't remember if it was Rashi or Tosafot was asking a question on the text, and I said something like, well, I don't necessarily think that question has to be asked. And he said, okay, so you don't think the question has to be asked, but guess what? Rashi did. Right? Like, if you were Rashi, then we were studying you, then we wouldn't have asked that question. But Rashi thought we should ask that question. And I thought that was like a lovely and gentle way of like both explaining a methodology and also, lovingly putting me in my place, right? Okay, Matt, do you want to answer Larry's text, the reference to Arthur? Because we do that occasionally, and it'll be for everyone who does not remember Arthur. But since you evoke him, why don't you tell the class about who Arthur was?
Oh, I'm sorry. In the early days, he was this very senior citizen, highly schooled in the yeshivas of somewhere in Hungary, I think.
Hungary, yeah.
And then he escaped in the Kastner expedition before the last of the Hungarian Jews were sent off to Auschwitz. And he became a big, successful inventor, color television. He's credited with inventing color television or
something like that.
To that, among other things.
Transistors, something high.
And he had a company of his own, very successful. And he joined our class late in life and was very inspirational, but in a very dry, I wouldn't say dry, but in a very, he asked the kind of question that I asked. That's why I think of him. He would always say, why is Rashi making us look into these things? It's so beautiful the way it is, that kind of thing.
He had no patience for Narishkeit in study or in his life, right? He was he wasn't a Yekka from Germany, but he had certain Yekka qualities. When I started this class, which was, I think, September or October, maybe even earlier of 2009, when I arrived, before he joined, he wanted to have a meeting with me. He said he had not studied Rashi since he was a 13-year-old boy.
But he remembered it.
You remember, right? Like he drank it like mother's milk in the yeshivas of Hungary, and then he hadn't left Judaism, but he'd left yeshivish Judaism. And he'd never been in a situation in all of his years connected to Beth Am and other synagogues of like studying the text in the original. And he was so excited. I think he was probably 85 or something when I began the class, if not older. And he was a regular, and he was lovable and lovely, and so wise, and had no patience for when Rashi would do this. That's the reference to Arthur, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory. Great. Okay. Let's go to the next verse. Verse 15, unless there's something that I'm missing. Is anyone's hand up? No one's hand is up. Matt, since you're unmuted, do you want to read verse 15?
Okay, let me see if I can find it here. Yes, I've got it.
By the way, every once in a while, Matt, when you move in and out of your faux background, your keyboard looks like it has a tassel, and it's very cute because there's an interaction of the there you go.
All right. Okay, let's see if I can read this Vayichas el et ein. Wow. All right. Vayichas et ein kol haaretz v'tichshach haaretz v'yochal et kol esev haaretz ve'et kol pri ha'etz. Should I keep going? Also, pri ha'etz asher hotir habarad v'lo notar kol yerek ba'etz u'ba'esev hasadeh b'chol eretz mitzrayim.
Okay. See if we can do for translating there.
Okay, v'yichas. Oh, the chasot, it was covered. Al ayin kol haaretz. So the whole of the land was covered from view. V'tichshoch haaretz, and the land became dark.
Good.
And all the grass was eaten. All the grass of the land was eaten.
Right. These are active verbs, not passive verbs. So the antecedent pronoun subject is the locust swarm. So the locust swarm Vayachas covered everything that the eye did, and then it consumed. That's the subject of Vayochal. Yeah.
Vayochal and ate all the grass of the land, and all the fruit, all the fruit of the tree, all the tree fruit that Hotir was left, I guess.
That all of the tree fruit,
that was left.
What's the subject of Barad? Sorry, I gave you the answer. What's the subject of Hotir? Barad.
Let me think about that one. No, it's Barad. Yes, Barad. The hail.
Right. Everything the hail had left over. Asher Hotir Habarad.
Habarad. V'lo notar kol yerek ba'etz. And no green of tree or grass of the field was left in all the land of Egypt.
Very good. Okay. So the verse is showing us the totality of the destruction of the arbe, of the locust swarm. Chas, it covers. We had this once before, right? You can't translate Vayichas et ein haaretz as it covered the eye of the land, right? It clearly means it covered that which the eye could see of the land. Everett Fox translates it as the aspect of all the earth, which I think is great because he finds a word in English that is related to vision, aspect, right? But it conveys what the verse is trying to convey. If there are any other interesting translations out there, I'm open to hearing them. And the earth darkened. It consumed all. We have several categories: the Esav Haaretz, right, the vegetation of the earth, not only the stuff on the ground, but kol pri ha'etz, all the fruit of the tree that had been left, that the hail had let remain. And there was v'lo notar kol yerek ba'etz. There was no yerek ba'etz. How did you translate yerek ba'etz? Because that's going to be the subject of what Rashi says.
I can't remember. Growth, maybe, or the green of the tree, the greenness.
Right. So not only were the fruits gone and the grass is gone, but even the
leaves, maybe.
The green parts of the trees. So the trees were laid bare. Uve'esav hasadeh b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and there was no vegetation of the fields in all the land of Egypt. Okay. That's the end of the description of the locust. By the time we get to the next verse, which we'll probably get to in class, we already have Pharaoh's response to it. Any comments or questions on the verse itself? I see Tova's hand up. And yes, to Rick. And Azla Geresh an Vayochal, a very dramatic verse. Dramatic note. Usually you have these two together, Kadma v'Azla, but when the Kadma is gone, you just have an Azla, and as Rick and I have discussed in different trup systems, some people just sing the Azla as the second half of the Kadma v'Azla, so Kadma v'Azla, in which case the Azla would just be v'Azla. But I learned from my teacher that you do that differently if the Kadma is gone, and it's da 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 da, very dramatic. So yes, I sang a Myrna Zeret as Azla Gerish. Tova, and then Joanna.
I guess two comments, which kind of fit with what you said. I kind of got prickling at the back of my neck when we read this because it feels like it's looking back, but it's also looking forward, especially when you sort of know what's coming, because we've read several different plagues that had to do with the destruction of all the herbs and all of the green things growing, but we also know that the darkness is coming. And this brings both of those together in this kind of eerie way. And the Kadma Vizla Onmatzi Azlagerish emphasizes that, the darkness of the land. It's like it's the foreboding of what's coming next.
Yeah, it's going back to Matt's comment, beautiful literary instruments here, right? Almost like if you didn't know the end of the story, which no one reading this doesn't, and you read about this darkness, and then you get to the ninth plague, you're like, oh, wait a second, I was being led here. Yeah, great. Joanna, and then Larry Diane.
As we've been commenting, there's a great, literary style and sort of build up in this pasuk to, fully, in a very literary way, convey the totality of the destruction. But it's interesting to me to read this verse because I think, as Rick pointed out with the dramatic flourish of the trope, once you get past the dramatic flourish of the trope, Vaychaset ein kol haaretz vatachshach haaretz, why do you need the next words? You could jump to velo notar kol yerek ba'etz uv esev hasadeh b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. And in that middle part, like, it's interesting to me also, in one pass through Rabbi Kligfeld of explaining the phrases here, I think you translated Asef Haaretz as vegetation, but Asef quite literally is grasses. And so there's great specificity in that part of the verse, the grasses and the fruit trees. It doesn't cover the totality. So I think it's, one sense is, using examples to express the whole. And by giving us those specific examples, the verse is really painting that portrait of the totality.
Yeah, very nicely said, Joanna. Thank you for that. You're right. And some of these words, I mean, we've said this 1,000 times, some of these words, the reason we know what they mean are from these very verses, right? So there's something circular about our understanding of the meaning. And so in modern Hebrew, esev means grass. It would be interesting to trace how it came to be that esev meant something specific in contemporary Hebrew rather than something expansive in primordial Hebrew, right? Certainly in the opening verses of the Torah, you could read esev as being something representing all greenery, right? So it's hard to know where on the trajectory this is. But yes, there's something about this verse that is both telling us about the totality in one fell swoop and also subdividing each of the ways in which this locust swarm took over. I see Larry Diane's hand and I see Stevie's hand.
So I was going to say something very similar to what Tova said about the darkness and the connectivity, and then also the backward connectivity to the hail. And I also noticed, I can't remember if we mentioned it when we were talking about the phrase lo haya chen in the previous verse, but that was also the similar phrase was used with regard to the hail in chapter 9, verse 24. Kamohu asher lo haya kamohu, where with hail it also said it had never happened like that before. So there's connections all over the place, linking one to the other.
Yeah, the weaving of the warp and the woof is pretty impressive. Labrut times 3, Joel, on your sneezes. Great. Stevie, and then Leonard Rebecca.
Just that the language of darkened, tashchach, and the language of a color word, kol yerek, right, seems to have some sort of literary purpose there. That, right, if you're removing green and adding brown or other earth tones, then you have darkened, not merely because you've blocked out the sun, but because you've actually transformed the ground.
Yeah, that's great. Particularly if you think about what I'm looking out into a group of trees right now and imagining what it would look like in the winter. The green would be replaced by essentially brown and white merging into a gray, right? If trees don't have leaves, that's the color. So very good. And that'll actually be interesting, particularly when we look at Rashi's comment and a commentary on Rashi's comment that we're going to look at. Rebecca Leonard.
I was reflecting on the fact that the swarm covered the whole earth, so everybody was impacted. But then when it talks about eating the grass and the fruit and such and all the green things, it references which the hail had left. So I went back because I thought, yeah, weren't the Israelites kind of excluded a little bit from some of the plagues? And so I see in chapter 9, verse 26, only in the land of Goshen, the Israelites were, there was no hail. So I wonder if now when they say it was the grass and fruit which the hail had left, well, there wasn't hail in Goshen, so maybe that tells us that yes, indeed, the Israelites section was not impacted by the locust swarm, so they had fruit and grass and things to eat.
Wait, are you saying that this verse is suggesting that since the only stuff that was left over was in Goshen, that the locust swarms are even attacking that? Or
no,
that
they're not.
Get spared again?
Because it says they ate the stuff that was left by the hail. Well, there was no hail in Goshen, so not even referring to Goshen because there was no hail.
Nice. Great. I like that read.
That's nice.
Okay. Anyone else in that verse? Okay. Rashi has a very short comment, and Rabbi Frankis, amongst others, would say that those are usually the hardest Rashis to understand. I'm not sure this is hard to understand, but we're going to read a comment on what he said just to make sure we're understanding why he's saying what he's saying. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. It's clear what he's saying. It's less clear why he's saying what he's saying. Go ahead, Matt. You have to unmute. You got muted.
Don't mute me, bro. Okay, here we go. Kol yerek, ale yerek, verdure, belaz.
Good. Okay.
For once, I recognize the French word. Belaz.
Yes.
So all the green, meaning the green leaves, verdure, like verdant in English, in the foreign language.
Good. This is a rare moment where it's not even that you have to know French to understand this. I think verdure is a pretty good English word, meaning the same thing in movement.
Verdure, yeah.
Right? And I'll share, although we don't really need it, I'll share the Otsar Loazé Rashi just to show you that what Matt said is agreed upon by the scholars, right? So this is entry number 3083 of all the times that Rashi uses Lashon Loazi, although in this listing, the Talmudic references come first, so it's not the 3083rd reference in the Torah. It's after all the references of the Talmud. So Yerek, verdure, and he renders it as werdur. I guess like a W, like a V, like a Wiener Schnitzel. Yerek, smachya iroka. It's green growth. Good. Okay. Before we look at Siftei Chachamim, which is a super commentary on Rashi, anyone want to suggest like the why here? Like we know what Rashi said, but why is he saying that? What was not clear from the verse such that Rashi has to say, hey, reader, when you get to that phrase, kol yerek, all of the greenery, what it means is the green leaf on the tree. Part of me wants to say to Rashi, like, yeah, I know. That's clearly what it meant. So anyone want to either give their own interpretation or maybe Baruch Shetichavein predict what the Siftei Chachamim might say? I see Norman's hand up, but you have the floor, Matt, if you want to say something.
Oh, I just thought maybe he thought that Yerek Ha'etz was puzzling to people. What's the green of the tree? Because trees are bark colored. Once the leaves are gone. Okay, possible. Norm?
I think it means he's telling us that it was everything green, all of the leaves, palm fronds, everything that was green, not just things that we think of as edible, not just things that grow low on the ground, but everything that's green was gone. The trees, such as there are, were just completely naked. And that's not the way things usually happen in that area.
Interesting. I think the way Siftei Chachamim is going to read it is to read Rashi as reading the verse as limiting the impact of this word, and you're reading Rashi as the opposite, which is interesting. That unless you think, Rita, that Kol Yerek just meant something specific, it means any green thing you would see anywhere in any tree, gone. Even if you would not have considered it vital or edible or even worrisome that it was gone, it was gone. So that's interesting possibility. Stevie?
It won't be long now till the Israelites are going to need some hyssop and some bitter herbs, which weren't herbs, they were leaves, right? So we're going to need certain plant products for Pesach.
Okay.
So if they were all gone, we'd have a problem.
Okay, so therefore, what Rashi is telling us is what? Because that's close to what Siftei Chachamim is going to say.
Yeah, that it's just, things like tree leaves and grasses and.
Correct, right? That there's an implied just in what Rashi said, that this is not comprehensive, anything green, including, I hadn't even thought about the Azov, right? Greens that might be needed soon for a ritual. It's just the leaves on the tree, right? That they didn't just eat the fruit, they also ate the leaves, okay? That's going to be very similar to what Siftei Chachamim is going to say. Joanna?
It's funny about whether this is limiting or expansive, and that, and it's an interesting read now to go back and see it as limiting, because like when I first read the verse, as I commented before, to me, like I read Rashi as it was being read out loud before we started the discussion as like, oh, he's on my page. The first part of the verse was limiting, and now he's pointing out, like, be expansive from here on. So it's just interesting. As always, the Shivim Panim La Torah and how many ways there are to turn a phrase.
Right, and even at least, Shnei Panim, Shnei or Shtei? Shnei Panim Shel Rashi, right? Like even the short Rashi, you can read the short Rashi, as we already heard, too radically. It's not that radical. Nothing's changing understanding of God and the Torah, but at least in terms of the reason why Rashi wrote the comment, it's possible to read him in diametrically opposing directions. Okay, let's now look at the Siftei Chachamim, which is one of 4 or 5 classic commentaries on Rashi. Usually when I brought you Siftei Chachamim, I brought you a super commentary on Rashi. I brought you the Gur Aryeh, which is Maharal of Prague's commentary on Rashi. And in fact, maybe those of you who are coming or thinking of coming on next year's trip, one of the things that I plan to do is to, in each of the places where we're going to be, where a great sage once lived and taught, I'm going to teach something of that sage's material. So maybe when we're in Prague at the Shul of the Maharal, I'll teach something from the Gur Aryeh on Rashi. So just a thought. This is what the Siftei Chachamim, not Maharal, says on Alei Yarok. I'll just read this since I've got it up. Dekashe l'Rashi. Rashi was troubled by something. V'ha ein shayach gabe eitz. What's the lam eitz? Gabe eitz. Maybe it's legabe lashon yarok. Rashi's troubled by the fact because when it comes to a tree, someone said this before, your first inclination for the color to describe the tree is not green. And remember also that I'm in Connecticut right now, and all the trees are green, but green is a Northeast color and not necessarily a Middle East color, right? One of the hardest things for me to get used to when I moved to Los Angeles 15 years ago is what the vistas look like from the road, even when you're looking at nature, right? I grew up in green, and Southern California is much less green. So Rashi's wondering, why does the verse say kol yerek ba'etz, all the green of the tree, when we don't think of tree as primarily being a green color, at least in the Middle East. The Dehakativ, and it says, after all, in the 9th chapter of Bereshit, He yerek esev. Let's look at that. So this is after the flood, when God rearranges the eating habits of the pre-Israelite people. And the verse is Kol remes asher hu chai, anything crawling that is alive, lachem yeh le'ochla, you can eat that. Ke yerek esev, like the green of the grasses or the green of the things growing on the ground. Natati lachem et kol, I gave to you everything to eat. So what Rashi is saying, what the Siftei Chachamim is saying here is that our natural inclination when we hear yerek is yerek esev. The ground is green. The trees are not necessarily green. That would be our normal assumption. And now back to the Siftei Chachamim. V'ha'esev hasadeh nikraim yirakot. And the grasses of the green are usually referred to as being yirakot. Yirakot in modern Hebrew means vegetables, but it just meant greenery earlier on. Umefaresh, that's why Rashi says aleh yarok, the green leaf, not the tree itself. Ukeilu kativ aleh yarok, as if our verse had not said eitz, but had said aleh. Right? So Rashi is basically saying, almost read the verse as it says, velo notar kol, what is it? Kol aleh yarok, any green leaf, as opposed to the phrase that we have, yerek ba'etz, the green stuff on the tree. The alzeh mevi verdure, and that's why he brings the word verdure below us. Kemo shekarin la'aleh yarok, just like we call the leaves green, kenhu b'lashon hakodesh, you can also use it in the holy language, right? So what the Siftei Chachamim, has he added so much to our understanding of Torah revelation? No. But he's saying what Rashi is doing here is disabusing you of the notion that the word yarok, yerek, cannot apply to trees, and it doesn't only apply to grasses, and to say that this is, according to Rashi, a very specific reference in the verse, which is to say that the locusts ate all of the esav haaretz, all of the grasses of the land, the kol pri ha'etz, and also the fruit of the tree, asher hotir habarad, that the locusts had left over. And not only that, there was no remaining even leaves on the tree. Kol yerek does not refer to the grass anymore. Uve esav hasadeh, that's the grasses again. Nothing was left upon all of the land of Egypt. Possibly going in the direction that Stevie said explicitly, not saying that all herbs were gone, but just the green of the tree. Okay. Norm's hand was up and then down. Do you want it to be up again? Okay. Anything else on this verse or Rashi? All right, we're entering our, in some ways, our third verse of the day. We're moving right along. The next, there's a next 6, 7, 8, next 3 verses, Rashi is quiet. So we will have other commentators speaking to us instead. So let's see, who have we not heard from today? Alan, are you in a place where you can read verse 16? Going once? Maybe Alan's gone. Sue, do you want to read verse 16?
Yes. Okay. Ready. I've lost it. Okay. But the maher. Yeah?
Yeah.
Vayimaher. Vayimaher paro likro lemoshe ulaharon vayomer chatati ladonai alechem velachem. Okay. And Pharaoh called Moshe and Aaron, and he said, I have sinned against against your God of gods, your God, and you.
Good. Okay. So beautiful translation, a suggestion of Pharaoh's recognizing his own sinfulness, not the first time he's used the word chatati, and we're going to compare it to a previous reference when we look at the commentary, to Adonai your God. So the Torah puts in Pharaoh's mouth, which is not to say that Pharaoh actually said this, but the Torah puts in Pharaoh's mouth that he not only refers to the one who is your divinity, but using God by God's proper name, also not the first time he's done that, and vilachem, and I've also sinned against you. The lamed here is hard to translate because a lamed is a many-meaninged preposition, so it's not to you or for you. It's just the verb lachato, to sin, invites the lamed. I've sinned. It's translated against. I've sinned against Adonai your God and against you. Good. Okay. Let's see if anyone has any thoughts or comments on the verse itself. I see Larry and Diane's hand, then I see Norman's hand, and then we'll, if we have time, we'll look at at least one commentary on this verse. Rashi is quiet on this verse. He was not quiet the last time Pharaoh said that he had sinned, but Rashi is quiet this time. Larry, Diane?
So I don't recall the time before, but I find this to be a momentous verse.
Okay.
And then I'm flabbergasted that Rashi's quiet, because that means Rashi thinks that it's obvious what's going on here. But it's not obvious to me at all. So first of all, a slight modification of Sue's translation, that he said, I've sinned before Hashem, before Yud-He Vav-He, the name of God. You are God. So he names him, which he's done before, I think. But I think that's pretty important, that he's not just saying, I've sinned before your God. I've sinned before Joe, your God. And then he says, and I've sinned before you, or I've offended you. And it's not clear to me, maybe it's clear, but whether the lachem is Aaron and Moses and Aaron, or whether the sin is for the people, the Israelites. But this is an act of absolute contrition, which needs to be explained. I'm not saying it can't be explained, but it needs to be explained. And Rashi just says not a word.
It's a moment of absolute and temporary contrition, right? We discuss this all the time, that how quickly Pharaoh and all of us revert back as soon as the immediate threat is taken away. I'll share the screen because the commentary we're going to look at is going to bring us there anyway, of the previous, well, you don't have to share the screen. Well, I will, but it's just chapter 9, verse 27, if you want to just thumb to it. On the last time we had Pharaoh use that language, Vayishlach Paro, Pharaoh dispatched, Vayikra Moshe Aaron, he calls them both, Vayomer Alehem, and he said to them, Chatati Hapam, like, guys, this time I've really sinned, same root. There's no to whom he has sinned, there's no lamed, there's no preposition, but he says Adonai HaTzadik, so using God's proper name, Joe, as Larry calls God, apparently. God is the righteous one. V'ani v'amiv harshaim, and I and my people are wicked. So that's also, you could say, Larry, a moment of pretty contrite contrition, right? To say that it's three phrases: I've sinned, God is right, and we are evil, right? Or we are in the wrong. And that didn't last very long, obviously. So we're going to look at that more closely in a second as we look at the commentary. But first, Norm and then Joanna.
I wonder if he was even momentarily sincere. He may have been at least momentarily sincere in his contrition. And I note that Rick asked the interesting question that when he says he has sinned lahem, is he speaking he's sinned only against Moshe and Aharon, or is he saying he sinned against the whole Israelite people?
Yeah,
that's an interesting aspect also. But I don't think there are things you can get out of the Peshat, and so Rashi wasn't asked about them or didn't answer them in any convincing way, and so we don't have any Rashi.
Yeah. Had Pharaoh just called Moses, and then the lachem was used, then we would infer that the lachem is to you and all the people you represent. But since Moses and Aaron are both there, it could be understood as him showing a certain obeisance to those particular two. And there's no way of knowing which one it is. Good. Joanna?
it's interesting to compare the first half of the verse in both cases and the last half of the verse in both cases. In chapter 9, in the first half, you have Paro and then a greater group, the whole nation. Here in 10, it's only Paro. In the first one, the end of the verse, it's only against God. Here, it's against God and some others, whether those others are Moshe and Aaron or the whole people.
Yeah. And the commentary we're about to read makes a similar point. And by the way, I misspoke before. This might be interesting for you, Larry. Rashi was quiet on that verse too. In chapter 9, verse 27, Rashi says nothing. I forgot which commentary we looked at because we probably did, but Rashi is not provoked by this language, which is an interesting and endless argument from silence as to why not. Tova?
If I could take a more cynical stance, I was focusing on the word vaymaher, that he hastened, like instantly, and it made me wonder if he's learned the wrong lesson, so to speak. Got a genuine disaster going on with the Arbe, but he's also learned that if he goes and apologizes, it'll go away. So he hastens to do the apology so that he can get rid of it.
That's good. It's a good segue into what we're going to look at. We probably won't finish this comment right now because the Kasuto, who we're going to look at, also focuses on the Vayamaher. So let me share that. Let me pull it up. Oops. Okay. Where is it? Okay, so this is the, This is the commentary of Rabbi Umberto Casuto. We've looked at him at least 3 or 4 times. An Italian commentator, late 19th, early 20th, one of the few in that generation who was beginning to really bring to bear modern science to a very traditional, very orthodox, traditional understanding of Perush HaMikra. We had a long comment by him when it came to the black of the inside of the kiln and in the boils. This is what Casuto says on this verse. Kfar lifnei hahashmada haklalit shel kol yereg. Even before the complete destruction, hashmada is from the verb lahashmid, to destroy. You have that in the book of Esther, that what Haman's going to do to us is lahashmidu labeit, to destroy and to annihilate. Even before the complete comprehensive destruction of all of the greenery, hanis keret besof pasuk tet vav, which is explained in the previous verse 15, miher paro, Pharaoh hastened. So Tova, what Casuto is saying is even more, it's hard to know if he's reading it cynically or not, but he's really reading the Vayamaher intentionally, that yes, verse 15 in one verse explained the entire impact of the locust, and verse 16 almost has to be put in the middle of verse 15. As soon as Pharaoh saw what was coming, even before everything was destroyed, he rushed to Moshe and to Aaron. Kshera'a et hamon ha'arbeh, when he saw the enormous number, hamon, like the great size of the locust, shenach al eretz Mitzrayim, that was resting on the land of Egypt. So the first thing Casuto says is don't read Vayamaher lightly. Read it as indicating an intention by Pharaoh, so that the rushing will not just be because he knows that if he rushes, he'll be able to get this away from him, but he might even be able to prevent the full destruction of the greenery, which he was not able to do, right? That's also implied there. So let's leave it right there because it's 9:30 on the West Coast, and we'll pick up next time in the middle of Casuto's comment, and then we'll be able to go to the next verse. So great to see you all. I really miss this study, and next week also just on Zoom. The following week we'll be back in person in Whiteman. And have a good week, everyone. Kol tuv.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.